Thank you, Linda. A number of guests duly introduced by fellows beg leave to attend your meeting. Is it your pleasure that I welcome them in your name? Thank you. Minutes.
Ordinary meeting, Thursday, the 4th of April, 2024, Burlington House and online. Professor Martin Millett, President in the chair. The minutes of the ordinary meeting of Thursday, the 28th of March, 2024 were read and signed. The following, being in attendance and having signed the obligation required by the statutes, was duly admitted fellow, Chris Sullivan. The following communication was then laid before the Society. Queen Jane's Proclamation of Accession of 1553 and the Gendering of the English Monarchy by Dr. J. Stephen Edwards. Thanks were returned for this communication. The President announced that the next meeting would be the anniversary meeting on the 25th of April, 2024, and then adjourned the meeting. A reception followed.
Is it your pleasure that I sign these minutes as a true and complete record? Aha, you are correct. We will correct that minute. Yes. Thank you. Right.
Yes. It might have been later placed online, but we will check that. Very sharp-eyed.
Yep. Thank you. Now turning to the business of the anniversary meeting. First, it's my great pleasure to thank the Honorary Secretary and ordinary members of Council whose terms of service come to an end today. Heather Sabir, our Honorary Secretary, Emily Cole, who is with us here today, and Victoria Bryant and Rowie Sweet, neither of whom could be with us. I'm very grateful to them for their service. Heather, I'll say a few words about later. Emily, Victoria and Rowie have been extremely helpful in a period quite a lot of activity for the Society, if I can put it that way. So thank you very much indeed. And we're always very grateful to our fellows who are willing to serve in this way. Item 3, I announced that the ballots for President, Honorary Secretary and 4 ordinary members of Council are uncontested this year and will therefore not take place as provided for in Order Number 1, paragraph 4.2. We therefore, as anniversary meeting, note the elections as follows. Myself re-elected as President, Shahina Farid as Honorary Secretary. Shahina sent her apologies today, is unable to be here as she's attending a memorial service in Oxford. And as ordinary members of Council, we welcome Jennifer Susan Alexander, Anthony Joseph Musson, Andrew Peter Seaman, Thomas James Titus Williams. So they serve as ordinary members of Council for the next 3 years. Blue papers.
Candidates in the ballot, which closes on the 27th of June 2024. Paul Anthony Bland, BA, PhD, a historian specializing in medieval English legal and constitutional history. Lorenzo Calvelli, MA, PhD, associate professor of Roman history at Ca' Foscari, University of Venice. Sam Challis, BA, MST, DPhil, head of the Rock Art Institute at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. Caroline Dugito, BA, Surveyor of the King's Works of Art at the Royal Collection Trust. Andrew Han, BA, DPhil, Properties Historian Team Leader at English Heritage. Misha David Swad Lazarus, BA, MA, DPhil, a senior lecturer in the English department in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, specializing in book history. Thomas P. Leopard, MA, PhD, a specialist in island archaeology and a project director at the International Archaeological Research Institute in Honolulu, Hawaii. Henrik Schoenfeld, MPhil, PhD, Professor of Sustainable Architecture in the Kent School of Architecture and Planning. Janet Toll, BA, MA, PhD, Head of Archive and Library at Historic England. And Catherine Tempest, BA, MA, PhD, Lecturer in Roman History at the University of Leicester.
Thank you. I announce the following results of the ballot held today, the 25th of April. I declare the following are duly elected as Fellows of the Society of Antiquaries of London: Pippa Shirley, Johanna Roth, Rebecca Lane, Anna Morell, Carl Heron, Jeremy Simons, and Nicola Terranato. Thank you. I now invite the Treasurer to make her statement.
Thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon, everyone. Now we come to what my predecessor used to call the most exciting part of the afternoon, namely the Treasurer's report. This is my first report to you as Treasurer, and I'd first like to thank Katie Drake, our Head of Finance and Resources, and Lance Stewart, who has covered Katie's sabbatical leave since September 2023, for their hard work and support and breaking in a new Treasurer. We will hear, I'm sure, of Memoria Lewis's outstanding contribution as Interim General Secretary, and I would like to thank Memoria as well, who's been very engaged in the financial work of the Society. Thanks are also due to the Finance Committee of the Society, who have diligently discharged the duty of detailed scrutiny of our financial affairs ahead of approval by Council. And in addition to discussing the report of the Council and financial statements for the year ended 31st of March 2023, given that that year ended over a year ago, I'll also speak about developments during the financial year just ended on 31st of March 2024, as well as the financial outlook and the work that lies ahead under the leadership of our new Chief Executive, Natasha McEnroe, now that the matter of Burlington House and its lease have been settled. So a copy of the accounts have already been filed with the Charity Commission and is also available on the Society website. According to procedure, the Finance Committee reviewed the report in detail and Council approved the financial statements before they were submitted. So therefore, there's nothing to do today, as it were, other than to receive this report. This report is not the most interesting report you will read from the Society, as it has to comply with charity accounting standards and follows a set format made up of 4 main sections. The first provides narrative about the activities of the Society. The second gives information on our legal structure and governance. The third is the audit report prepared by our auditors, Moore Kingston Smith. And the fourth contains the detailed financial information about the revenues and costs arising from the Society's activities. Total income for the year to 31st of March 2023 was 2.5 million, which was up about 4.5% on the previous year. And within this, the major variances were restricted donations and grants for Kelmscott Manor, past, present and future, were 338,000, and which was down from last year's amount of 1.04 million, which was due to the project reaching the end of the capital phase in March 2022. Pleasingly, our room hire income increased by 61,000 to a level of 96,000, as this income stream recovered faster than expected in the aftermath of COVID-19. From Kelmscott, we received income of 231,961 to be precise, which was considerably above the just under £5,000 we received the previous year after the reopening to the public after the redevelopment work. And having launched our new affiliate member scheme in July 2022, we received over 12,000 of membership fees from affiliates, and overall subscriptions and admissions increased by 4.7% to £606,000. Now, despite the increase in trading income at Kelmscott, unfortunately, this fell short of the original budget expectation due to lower than forecast visitor numbers. I'm sure fellows will recognise this as a theme that is common across the heritage sector, where visitor numbers have been slow to recover to pre-COVID-19 levels. On the cost side of the equation, consolidated expenditure increased to £3,111,344, so just over £3 million from just over £2.5 million in 2022, representing an increase of 22%. This was due to several factors, with the reopening of Kelmscott having had the greatest impact, with additional operating costs of £235,000 being incurred. Our net deficit for the year, before gains and losses on investments and actuarial adjustments on defined benefit pension schemes, was a loss of £579,000, a deterioration from a loss of £129,000 in 2022. After unrealised losses of £944,000 on our investment portfolio and realised losses of £30,500 thereon, our net deficit for the year was £1,554,000. A small positive actuarial gain on our pension fund reduced this very slightly, but not materially. I'd like to reassure the fellowship, having read out such stark numbers, that the unrealised loss of £944,000 on our investment portfolio was a paper loss as a result of marking the valuation of our investments to market at the 31st of March last year, which was a particularly poor time for markets. And I'm glad to say the portfolio has recovered since in value, and I'll say a little bit more about that later on. One might therefore argue that the real loss position is closer to a deficit of £600,000, which is still not inconsiderable. In order to fund this deficit, a withdrawal of £379,000 was made from the Society's unrestricted investments, approximately the same level of withdrawal as in 2022. Now, as disclosed on page 28 of the report, in the table where we discuss principal risks, the fact that the Society continues to make an operating deficit is clearly highlighted as one of our biggest risks. This is a matter of considerable concern to the Finance Committee and to Council, as this deficit has to be funded out of unrestricted reserves. And as at the 31st of March 2023, those reserves stood at £5.8 million. So there are a few years left of cushion, so it's not an immediate source of worry, but we do need to act to bring this into balance. And with the Burlington House lease now resolved and Kelmscott fully reopened, I believe we can get on the road to financial sustainability. But as stated in our report, which has been lodged with the Charity Commission, we are likely to continue to draw on our unrestricted reserves until at least the end of the 2024-25 year to fund our operations. So turning to the year that's just ended, therefore are not covered in the report that I've just gone through, with management accounts available to the end of the third quarter of that year, the 31st of December 2023, as foreshadowed by my predecessor, we have continued to register operating losses during this year. This has been due to several factors, the most exceptional of which was the costs associated with completing the Burlington House lease negotiations, which was a very necessary expenditure and will help us a great deal in the future. But the Kelmscott ticket sales have continued to lag behind the original budget as well. And consequently, we have had to draw further cash out of our investment portfolio. But the good news is that the markets have performed better, and the valuation of our portfolio has increased by 2% to £14,500 roughly in the year, which represents an increase of 2% despite withdrawing capital. So that's good news. We're relatively intact there. Now, for the new financial year to the 31st of March 2025, the finance team, chief executive and I are currently reviewing the budget, as one would always do when an organisation appoints a new leader. And the view is that we will see what can be done to address that deficit and come up with a deficit reduction plan over the medium term. And as I keep saying, with the lease negotiation settled, we're now well positioned to fundraise to secure a sustainable future for the organisation. And I firmly believe that our excellent programme of lectures and events, attended in person or digitally, alongside our cohort of affiliate members, will play an important part in supporting our revenue generation and fundraising efforts to rebuild our reserves and create a sustainable and financially resilient society for future generations. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions for the Treasurer? What? I am.
Yes. Yes, that's the main event.
We now come to the appointment, if I can have that mic.
Absolutely.
Thanks. The appointment of Moore Kingston Smith as the Society's auditors for 2024-25. Natasha.
And so just to remind people, don't vote if you're not a fellow, please, or if you've already voted online or by post. So this is a show of hands for people first who are in the room. If you would like to vote yes for the appointment of Moore Kingston Smith, please raise your hand and keep it raised for a moment to allow us to count.
Most exciting part of the meeting.
How many do you make it, Linda? I make it 46. Thank you. Could I ask everybody in the room for a show of hands if you are voting no? Okay, well, that's much quicker. And now for online. Could we have a show of hands for the online audience if you are voting yes to the appointment of Kingston Moore Smith, and please keep them raised, your virtual hands. And then people at home, please, could you put your hand up now if you wish to vote no? Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. The total votes online, I 58, postal I 19, in person 53, which is something like 125. There are no votes online, postal, in person. So Morgan and Smith are appointed. I need to sign that. Don't I? Isn't digital technology wonderful? Thank you. I now will read the names of fellows who have died since our last anniversary meeting on the 27th of April last year. Dr. Donald Adamson, Mr. Anthony Barnes, Mr. Klaus Barr, Professor James Bennett, Mrs. Hugh Burrill, Lord Peter Brooke, Dr. Anne Brooks, Professor Clive Burgess, Mr. Richard Busby, Mr. John Cannon, Professor Graham Clark, Mr. George Clark, Dr. Helen Clark, Professor Graham Connor, Lord Patrick Cormack, Professor Dame Rosemary Cramp, Mr. Martin Davies, Mr. George Davies, Mr. Michael Flint, Dr. Jill Franklin, Dr. Audrey Furness, Professor Jack Golson, Dr. John Hounsman, Dr. C. Kaufman, Dr. John Kenyon, Mr. John Leith, Dr. Lisa Lodwick, Dr. Malcolm Lyne, Mr. Alistair Maxwell Irving, Dr. Jonathan Musgrave, Miss Robin Myers, Mr. John Newman, Mr. Neil Rind, Dr. Anthony Rook, Mrs. Margaret Sparks, Professor John Sutton, Mr. Jonathan Tubb, Miss Lorna Walker, Miss Penelope Rogers, and Dr. Stanley West. On a more cheerful note, I note and thank the benefactors of the Society for 2023-24. Extremely grateful for the support of the National Lottery Heritage Fund, Arts Council England, V&A Purchase Fund, the Blavatnik Family Foundation, the Mercers Company, the LG Harris Trust, and the Museum of London Development, as well as all affiliates, fellows and supporters who have helped the Society's projects at Burlington House and Kelmscott Manor. We'd also like to acknowledge the generous bequests from Anthony Emery, FSA, Peter J. Ferguson, FSA, Michael M.S. Watson, FSA, and Rachel E. Hall. Now turning to the pleasurable business of Society's medal. When I took over as president from Paul Drury in 2021, there was, I think, a feeling of despondency over the Burlington House lease negotiations, with serious debate about the likelihood that the Society would have to leave these buildings and probably also move out of London. When he took over the lease negotiations, Andrew MacDonald brought both experience of this type of issue and what I would call a pragmatic can-do attitude. Developing very close working relations with the other courtyard societies, with politicians and civil servants, the situation gradually changed. Andrew combined skills of this type of negotiation with an unparalleled grasp of detail. One of the other courtyard society CEOs said, I think he's got a spreadsheet in his head. And he also has great ability to understand the issues as understood by the other side with whom we're negotiating. What a key feature of a negotiation. As a very senior civil servant whispered to me on the day we signed the heads of terms a few weeks ago in February, this would never have been achieved without Andrew MacDonald. To mark his contribution to the outcome of our lease negotiations and the success of the Save Burlington House campaign, it is my very great pleasure to present the Society Medal to Andrew MacDonald. Now, that you've all been waiting for. My anniversary address. But I'm not going to go to the lectern, but if colleagues would like to move to the front row, feel free to do so, or you can sleep up here instead. First of all, I would like to thank you all for electing me as your president for a second term. It's a great honour and privilege to continue to serve the Society. This is my third anniversary address as president. By my reckoning, this is the 273rd anniversary meeting since our Royal Charter was granted in November 1751. It comes as a highly significant moment in the history of our society, as we have at last settled our dispute with the government over the future of Burlington House. I'll return to this momentous event and its implications for the society in the second part of my address, but you'll notice I'm wearing a celebratory tie to mark the occasion. In general, the anniversary address provides the President with the opportunity to review and celebrate the achievements of the Society and to talk more broadly about the environment within which we operate. With this in mind, I will first look back over aspects of achievements in the past year. In doing this, I do not want to repeat what has already been said in recent messages to the Fellowship or in our annual report, The Antiquary, which well illustrates the diversity and quality of activities over the past year. But I would like briefly to highlight some key achievements. As I discussed last year, the development of our new strategy took up a lot of energy in 2022-23. Following its adoption by Council just before the last anniversary meeting, there had been considerable further work undertaken by our staff on planning its implementation, which has wide-reaching consequences for our future operations. I have been immensely impressed by the way the transition has been handled by all concerned, and especially under the leadership of our interim General Secretary, Memoria Lewis. Memoria brought skills and experience honed through leading a wide range of other organisations as interim CEO, and her outsider's eyes and senses, as well as her cheerful enthusiasm, have been of immense value to the Society during her 11 months with us. In addition to work on the implementation of the strategy, Memoria has also helped us move forward in the modernisation of our finance and IT support systems, again, providing invaluable direction and advice. The officers and council are very grateful indeed to Memoria for her work over this interim period and have resolved to give her life membership as an affiliate as a small token of the Society's thanks. Alongside this longer-term planning and development work, there have been other notable achievements during the year. The library and collections team have not only continued their excellent day-to-day work, but have also undertaken the Herculean task of preparing the paperwork for renewing our Arts Council Museum accreditation. Anyone who has had anything to do with this highly worthwhile scheme will be aware that it nonetheless imposes a very considerable burden on the staff involved. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dunya and her team for their efforts on our behalf. Alongside this, the team has also been engaged in additional new work to support both our open house events, as well as a number of visits from ministers and members of both Houses of Parliament whom we invited to visit in connection with the Burlington House lease campaign. I would say, in parentheses here, on a couple of occasions, assistants and civil servants had to more or less drag members of parliament and ministers from various parts of the presentation, saying, you've got a meeting back at the House, you've got to leave now. They really appreciated the access and explanation of the collections by our staff and others. Following a successful application for funding from the National Heritage Lottery Fund, very end of 2022, the Society launched its Sensing History project during 2023. This has allowed us to open to the public on Fridays, as well as bring a wide variety of groups of children and young people into Burlington House to be enthused about their material past. This work complements the outreach programme already underway at Kelmscott Manor, and I firmly believe that both programmes are key for the future of our subjects. And I've been delighted to hear about the ways in which our young visitors in particular have been excited and enthused about what we have to offer. Through this, in the last year, we have doubled the footfall into Burlington House. It generally runs on average about 3,500, with more than 7,000 in the last 12 months, including schools and community groups. I'm particularly grateful to Dominic Wallace, our Head of Development, for his work in securing the funding for the Sensing History project. Dominic has equally been successful working with the team at Kelmscott Manor in securing funding for the restoration of the tapestry room there, which includes both work on the conservation of the tapestries themselves and the their rehanging in the configuration as it was in Morris's time. These highlights underline the dynamism, skill and dedication of all our staff. And in this context, I'm delighted to welcome Natasha McEnroe as our new General Secretary. Natasha joined the Society only at the beginning of April, but I think it feels much longer ago for Natasha. She's had a very busy month. She joins us from the Science Museum, where she was Keeper of Medicine. She brings with her a wealth of experience from a variety of museums and heritage organisations, and in delivering both capital and academic heritage projects. We warmly welcome her here. We look forward to a bright future for this society. Finally, before turning to Burlington House, although I've already expressed the Society's thanks to those members of the Council who are standing down today, I'd like to make an especial mention again of Heather Sabir, who has completed 2 terms as Honorary Secretary, serving through an especially challenging period. Our Honorary Secretary takes special responsibility for our library and collections, including Kelmscott Manor. Fellows only need look at the achievements in these areas over the past 6 years to see just how much has been done. Heather has also been a great colleague, a steadfast member of the officer team. I'm personally extremely grateful to her. Turning now to Burlington House, as I noted above, celebrating our success in negotiating a sustainable lease marks a key point in the history of the Society. So I'd like to explore both the terms of the new lease and their implications. Before doing this, it seems appropriate as antiquarians for us to look back at the history of our tenure, especially since 2024 marks 150 years since we first moved into Burlington House. That move took place late in 1874, so the first anniversary meeting held here in this room took place in April 1875. Looking back over the proceedings of the Society leading up to that move provides something of a sense of déjà vu. The negotiations over the move from Somerset House to Burlington House themselves took over 20 years. The Society had been granted premises in Somerset House along with the Royal Society by King George III in 1776. However, with the growth of the inland revenue, those whose need for space in Somerset House was increasing, pressure grew from the 1850s for our Society to be relocated. Plans were developed courtyard of Burlington House to be built as a campus for groups of learned societies, with the Royal Academy at the same time taking over the house itself, incidentally on a 999-year lease in exchange for refurbishing the building. The societies moving into the courtyard did so on different terms, effectively occupying these buildings on a grace and favour basis, paying no rent and with the government maintaining the fabric of the building. Such was the attitude to culture and science in Victorian Britain. On the occasion of the 1875 address, the then President, Lord Stanhope, was indisposed, so the address was delivered by the Vice President, J. Winter-Jones. His text is well worth revisiting. It provides a brief account of the Society's peripatetic history prior to the occupation of Somerset House. It also describes how, during the move to Burlington House, the then Honorary Secretary, Mr. Watson, had taken personal charge of physically moving the books from Somerset House to Burlington House, suffering an accidental fall from a stepladder in the process, leaving him with a paralysed right arm for several weeks. Shahina, unfortunately not here today, will be relieved to note that we no longer expect such work from our Honorary Secretary, though Heather might differ. Fellows will be further pleased, I think, or relieved to hear that the current President will not also be emulating his predecessor on that occasion, who presented the Society with a portrait of himself, a portrait of which still hangs in our library. Our occupancy of Burlington House continued on the basis established in the 1870s until the end of the 20th century, when the government's policy that all their land should be registered with the Land Registry precipitated a dispute over the nature of our tenancy here. That dispute was only resolved in 2005 after a court case and arbitration, which led to the granting of a series of short-term leases, which seemed to secure our position until 2085. The unsatisfactory nature of this resolution and its unaffordability gradually became apparent, and after attempts to resolve the matter by negotiation behind the scenes, we launched our Save Burlington House campaign in collaboration with other courtyard societies under my predecessor. In my address last year, I noted that we had opened negotiations directly with ministers about the lease, and I was hopeful that we would be able to find an equitable solution. Working together with the other courtyard societies, I'm delighted to report that on the 28th of February this year, we signed a Heads of Terms agreement with the government, and work is in hand to prepare the lease documents and others for signature. That should happen, we hope, very shortly. It would not be appropriate here to go into details of what was a complex negotiation. I would like to share some information about both the principles of the agreement and what this means for our society. In doing this, I'd like to first pay tribute to those who brought the Save Burlington House campaign to a successful conclusion. Our team include, in addition to Andrew MacDonald, whom I thanked earlier, comprised the presidents and secretaries of the other courtyard societies, Vernon Hunt of April 6, our parliamentary advisors, and Nigel Fox of Capital Real Estate Partners, giving professional advice. Their success built on the sustained campaigning led by my predecessor, Paul Drury, and our previous General Secretary, John Lewis. Without their work in building a sound cross-party parliamentary support, we would never have achieved anything. Similarly, we have benefited from the sustained and skilled support of a wide range of members of both Houses of Parliament, most especially our fellow Tim Lawton, who is with us this evening, Sir Chris Bryant and Lord Cormac, as well as, it must be said, various members of the government behind the scenes. It's particularly sad to note that Patrick Cormac died in February, just days before the agreement was signed, and his tenacious pursuit of our interests in the House of Parliament should be underlined. At the same time, I'd like to acknowledge the constructive role played by Matt Thurston, Dan DeLange, Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, and John Millard of BNP Paribas, who from the other negotiating team engaged with us constructively in the final stages of discussions. In outline, the agreement grants the Courtyard Societies collectively a 999-year lease on Burlington House at a peppercorn rent. The Antiquaries share of what we have to pay for this amounts to £4.8 million, 25% up front, the balance over 10 years, which with interest amounts to £460,000 a year, 10 years. We will collectively become responsible for the running and maintenance of the building, and we have further agreed to invest in the building to bring it up to standard and make it sustainable for the future. We've further undertaken to enhance public access to our buildings and collections. At first sight, this looks like an enormous sum for the society to raise, but this should be set against the present rent, which is increasing annually on an escalator and currently stands at about £220,000 a year. As with all property purchases, we're acquiring an asset, no longer simply paying money out in rent, never to be seen again. Furthermore, 4.8 million represents excellent value. I'm advised by my staff that at today's prices, the same would buy you a 4-bedroom flat off Berkeley Square. I'm not in the market, by the way, for a 4-bedroom flat in Mayfair. But we also need to understand that we will have to pay our share of the annual running costs, and there is a backlog in maintenance that needs to be funded. Further work is being done on assessing the latter, but our initial estimate is that something around £10 million or more will need to be spent over the whole courtyard over the next few years. I'll return to the issue of costs and fundraising in a moment, but I think it is important first to explain our vision for wishing to stay in Burlington House and for its future. The acquisition of a lease is not an end in itself, but one of the means through which we can deliver the outward-looking strategy that I addressed in that I outlined in my address last year, and on which we have made great progress the last few months. As presently configured, we have inherited a building originally designed as a residence for the secretary and in part a library and meeting space. Bear in mind that the other half of the building was always intended to be the secretary's residence. Natasha, I'm sorry, we can't fulfill that. It has served us well over 150 years, but now needs to be reconfigured for the present century and beyond. And this must be done in an exemplary way, as befits a society that is concerned with heritage. We have a vision for the society's building to become the natural place for people from our sector to come together, whether formally or informally, when they're in London. This partly happens already with other societies meeting here with the use of our library collections and archives, but it can and should be much more. This needs careful design around a conceptual reconfiguration of the building. Broadly, we see the ground floor as becoming our outward-facing space for meetings, lectures, displays, and exhibitions, and with full provision for public access. The first floor and a refurbished basement would then be primarily used for fellows and researchers, with enhanced library space, informal meeting facilities, and a fellows' room where those visiting London can meet, talk, and form a social group, as a fellowship should be. This would leave the upper floor for administrative staff use and secure collection space. Throughout, we aspire to create facilities that are of the very highest quality for meetings, lectures, with state-of-the-art IT, state-of-the-art virtual meeting facilities and projection facilities. These must be available for organisations within our sector at affordable cost, but must also be used to generate income from other users outside the sector. In this way, Burlington House needs to serve not only the fellowship, but the wider sector and the interesting public, becoming the centre for our whole community when in London and a showcase for the sector too. Funding this will require us to raise money for three distinct strands. First, the lease purchase. Secondly, cross-courtyard building improvement investments, things like the windows, the roof, energy sustainability, etc. And third, for internal works to improve our own apartments. In broad terms, we will be looking to the fellowship for the lease purchase, and we will need to collaborate with the other courtyard societies in raising external funds from public bodies, grant-making trusts and foundations for improvements to the building. To be effective, we will need to continue to work hand in hand with our other courtyard society colleagues so that we're able to raise funds from outside bodies without conflicts occurring. The aspects of collaboration cross-courtyard work need further work and development, so I don't have much more to say about them this evening, except to recall how at Kelmscott Manor, the project enabled us to bring in 6 million of inward investment of this kind, which shows what can be achieved when we wish to do so. In this context, it is also vital that we continue to develop the public-facing activities as laid out in our strategy. Our ability to engage and enthuse the public will be critical to fundraising external bodies to improve the building. In terms of lease purchase, we're looking to the fellowship in the first instance, since showing that we can help ourselves should encourage outside donors to help fund improvements to the building. Our strategy for the purchase is as follows. In terms of the initial payment of 1.2 million, 25% of the purchase price, we are enormously fortunate to have received a generous legacy of about £1 million, the will of our late fellow Anthony Emery. And we have already received pledges from others of gifts amounting to £60,000 since the lease was announced in March. Council will be considering how best to commemorate Anthony Emery's generous legacy at its next meeting. But it means we will be able to cover the bulk of the upfront payment from resources that we can already identify, especially when we take into account the sum that we would have had to pay in rent next year anyway. To raise funds for the remaining 75%, 460,000 a year for 10 years, we've agreed in principle two things. First, for the time being, any future legacies will be used towards the cost of the purchase of the lease, where the terms of the bequest allow this. And secondly, we've agreed not to fund the purchase from our existing free reserves. As the Treasurer has already indicated, we need to husband those reserves to ensure our long-term financial sustainability. So if in the short term we need to draw from free reserves to help pay that 460,000 a year, that money will be treated as a loan to be repaid over time. Next, we will be establishing a campaign group from within the fellowship to help steer fundraising to cover that remaining 75% of the purchase price. And we hope we will be able to encourage as many fellows as possible to contribute in some way. however modest. Just as an illustration, the annual sum needed every year for the next 10 years amounts to £153 per fellow with the current numbers of fellows. If you allow people to gift aid that only is £127.50 per fellow, or £10.63 per month. When broken down in this way, the target looks achievable. I'm aware that not all fellows will be willing or able to contribute, but I hope these figures give an indication that raising this money is not an impossible target. And I hope that many of you will want to support us in any way they can. Securing the future of Burlington House provides the Society with a means to control its destiny. The purchase of the lease and the refurbishment of the building is a 10-year project. Once achieved, the Society will be even better placed to build on its long tradition of promoting research into our past and communicating this to a wide audience. I hope you will join with me now in celebrating this success, and I hope I've encouraged many of you to get in touch and help secure the future of the Society at Burlington House. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions there. It's a peppercorn rent, so there are no annual rent. I'm not sure where we get the peppercorns from, but Andrew will probably know that. There'll be a head lease, which is the whole courtyard, and then there'll be under leases, the wheeler room and the premises we have in the basement under chemistry will come to us as part of those under leases. No,
Sorry. Anyone else?
Thank you. Mr. President, you referred to donors, which sounds a bit like one-offs from companies and other people. I imagine you have considered forming some kind of ongoing relationship with suitable organisations in which there is a degree of cooperation, so funding is secured over a longer period of time, which seems to be the pattern with some other organisations.
Yep, we're entirely open to and the idea of establishing a fellows group to help with this is to explore exactly those sorts of arrangements. But I think it's going to be a mixture of fundraising strategies. But happy to talk to you about this.
Yeah, thank you very much, President. There's going to have to be a balance, isn't there, between this business of redoing the whole interior and paying
Yes.
the lease.
Yes.
Isn't it? I mean, that's going to be a major policy decision.
Yes. And council have given some consideration to this. We will be working detailed plans out. And of course, it has to be done in coordination with the rest of the courtyard.
A question and a comment. First of all, the comment, congratulations on everybody involved for getting us to where we are. But you mentioned in your address that the government used to be responsible for the maintenance of the courtyard. Would I be wrong to say they probably haven't done much over the last, how long have they been in? 15 years? So is there any money owing from the government?
You highlight an interesting point, both about the quality of the maintenance work, which has not always met the exacting standards that we would wish. And there is some money that is held by the organisation who are responsible for that, which is the subject of a certain amount of discussion and negotiation at the moment. We will have to have the building managed, so that money will presumably roll into that. But yes, there are a number of interesting elements to that I could share privately with you afterwards.
I'm a member of a corporation of the Royal Albert Hall, and I have inherited two stores on a 999-year lease. Getting a bit worried, there's only about 800 years left. But what tends to happen in the Albert Hall, according to the Albert Hall Act, Private Members Act, Parliament, we have to pay a seat rate every year for each seat.
Yep.
But if there's a special project, then the council puts to the members request to have a supplementary seat rate for a fixed number of years.
Yes.
And I wondered, sort of trying to get donations is a bit scattergun, and I wondered if the council had considered in these circumstances a supplementary rate for a limited number of years on the fellow subscription.
Again, I'm entirely open to discussions on those things. I think the difficulty with the subscription rate is that it is already high. That forms a barrier, particularly for recruiting new fellows. And again, committee looking at fundraising can look at this. My own personal feeling is that I would rather rely on donations and generosity of the fellows who can afford to contribute, rather than raising the subscription rate such that it excludes people we would love to have as fellows who are finding it difficult to afford fees as they are.
I do accept your point about adding on to the subscriptions. On the other hand, if at the time of sending out reminders about subscriptions, fellows are invited to make a gift aid donation of, say, £200 specifically towards paying off the annual £460,000. I would have thought that a substantial number of fellows would be willing to do that. When organizations need money from their active members, they do need to give guidance as to a particular sum. Otherwise, people either do nothing or they give a nominal amount. I mean, Middle Temple recently wrote to all its benches saying, our hall was built in 1573. Please would each of you make a donation of £1,573 on gift aid. I'm not suggesting you should do that, but if you have a specific sum and a reason, those who can afford it will feel rather guilty if they don't. That's my side.
Wise advice, Rupert. Paul.
Could I just add, as the previous past president, my congratulations to Martin and to Andrew and all involved for bringing this to a satisfactory conclusion. I don't think it was quite despair my term, or having a plan B, because we couldn't carry on here without that negotiation becoming successful. Thankfully, we are still here. We will remain here. And perhaps the gentleman who asked about the service charge, of course, all the costs of repairs and management are claimed back from the societies through a service charge, with several percentages added along the way. So actually, we should gain in terms of value for money in that direction as well.
And the maintenance may even be done then as well.
Yes, quite. And by the lowest tenderer within reason too, which again, we've suffered from lack of open tendering and open achievement of good value.
Anyone else? Thank you. Fellows and guests, I have pleasure in proposing that the thanks of the meeting be returned to the President for his address and that he be requested to allow it to be published.
Thank you.
Thank you. An initial note. Thank you.
Can I close the meeting by announcing there's a reception outside and that the meeting stands adjourned, but I'm also asked to remind those of you who don't have a ticket for the reception to speak to Yola. Thank you. Not